Alright guys, so I was asked to make another retop video for you guys, doing it the way that I choose to do my retopping method because it's a little bit different from Jacob's. We still use the same system and it's the same basic setup, but I do mine a little differently because I work from the hardest parts out. I find it's a little bit easier for me to do, so I'm going to show you how I do that now. I usually prefer to work in 3ds Max for my retops. It's a little bit different than Maya. There's a couple things you have to change in it. You have to set the distance for the retopo and things like that, but which you don't have to do for Maya because Maya allows you to lock the object in place and you work off of a static object. So let's get started. So I did what you guys did, and I selected a bone model from the Smithsonian Access website. I don't remember what it's called. I just picked the one that I thought would be the most fun to retop. The reason why is because retopping teeth is actually probably one of the harder things besides fingers to retop and tails. So I thought it'd be fun to retop these fangs that are coming out of the skull. So let's get started. First thing you need to do, just like Cooper showed you before, you need to lock the mesh. If you don't, it won't allow you to work on top of it. So we click the little magnet up here on the top, and now no matter what we do, we can't select the skull, so it's a static object. The next thing you do is usually your screen will be set up in the hierarchy scale, but obviously we need to click on this quad up here. That gives us our options to start. So I prefer to start with a quad draw. So we go down the quad draw tool, and we're gonna zoom in, and I'm not going to start here in the middle, which would be probably pretty easy to start off, mostly because it would be a giant big square in the middle. I'm actually going to start above the brow, just so that I can have different circulars going around all these circled parts on the skull. So I'm going to start up here. I'm going to put my first dot, and I'm going to choose to go to right about where the bridge starts to break again, or starts to move a little bit from straight surface. And I'll put my next, and boom. I'll make my little quad. Oops, sorry. Now that I have my quad together, shift, click. There we go. We got ourselves a starting piece. So next we click. I'm just going to relax it a little bit. And I'm going to drag the edge until I get to the spot where I'm pretty safe that it's going to be bending a little bit. Our brows generally make like a nice circular curve around, so we can't go too far. All right. Well, that is just fun. I am going to cover up this hole. That's because when we bake these shapes together, that's when we'll get the nice little detail. And I'm just going to keep moving along. I am going to stay on the outside edge for right now, and then we'll make our loop go inside afterwards. But we need to make sure that we take into account the changing of the curve of the skull, because as you come in, you can't see it from this angle, but you can see it from this angle. Our skull tends to kind of divot in. Right where the nose starts to break in. Even though it's protruding on our face, it actually divots in. So we need to be aware of that slight change in the skull when we are doing this. So what I usually like to do is just change my angle a little bit, and I'll drop it here. Because now you see from here, this doesn't look right. We would have just gone straight down, and we would have had a weird gap. But now we know that this lays down this way, because we twist it. So don't be afraid to move your model a little bit so you can see those really cool changes in the skull, which gives the skull its unique shape. So if you don't know what I'm doing right now, I'm doing the quad draw, then I hold shift and I place the surface that I'm looking for. And I'll keep doing that until I get to where I need to turn the model and start working on a different angle. So here, I can actually go through and just kind of do it all first. I just like to work in sections. Makes it a little bit easier for me. All right, so now we have this little deformation here that comes down. We're not going to go too deep into it. We're actually going to use that as like a line for a seam. So we will go here instead. I'm just going to move along this eye socket because now we're on the outside protrusion. This is pretty much the same all the way around. Perfect. And just like before, I'm not going to worry too much about the details of that hole that's right there in the skull because we are going to bake this on, and that will pull out a lot of those cool little notches that aren't holes. I really like that placement. Perfect. So now we've got it nice and lined up. We're just going to, and boom. So we got the outside of our eye. Normally, I don't go too far into the skulls, mostly because usually you're putting an eye in there, but unfortunately we don't have eyes for our skulls. So because it is supposed to be a bone. So what I am going to do is I'm going to do this a little bit into the eye socket, and then I'm just going to cut it off. And then I might just put eyes in there just to be a little creepy and make it ghoulish looking, because I think that gives a little bit more personality to the model we're doing, especially since we're, you know, just retopping and practicing our skills from basic modeling setups. So I'm going to go ahead and finish doing the eye socket, and then I'll do partial inside, and then we'll go from there. And remember, don't be afraid to move your model around like I am. You do really want to make sure you keep them as quads. You can have triangles. I do not recommend it. Your program is going to have a hard enough time as it is with all these crazy angles that you have. So we got a little pit there in the eye we need to be careful of. Now, I'm not 100% sure how Cooper would feel about going too deep into the skull. I will say, though, that take it in strides and just see how comfortable you feel about it. It also depends on how you're planning to light up the scene. Nice. Alright. So I'm going to finish this, and I'm going to finish the other eye, and then I'm going to do a circle around the nostril before I show you how I join all these together. Before I get to finishing the other eye, I did want to point out, when you're working on something that has like a sense of symmetry to it, it's always best to work with the seams being right in the middle of the skull for symmetry. What I mean is I could easily put like a square here and like fill up this gap. But when it comes to modeling, it's not going to look natural because you're in a symmetrical shape. There just happens to be a natural break in the middle that our eyes are pulled to. So for this shape, I just wanted to mention that if I were doing this, like, you know, really, and I am doing this obviously, I would put the lines here, and I would put actually 2 squares right here, and I would leave this line in the middle for the natural break that occurs in a symmetric shape. There's always a line there. It doesn't matter if you can see it or not. Symmetrical objects have a hidden line that's always there, and it's hard to explain when you look at something. But for example, if you look at the middle of a car, if you're looking straight forward at a car, you won't. There's no clear line, but you can see straight down the middle of it. You can almost see exactly where it breaks, and we don't want to break that up on a symmetrical shape. And now I'm going to keep going and finish my doing the eyes and nose. All right, so we got our eyes and nose sockets all nice and placed in. Now, if you look at it, I kind of didn't mean to, but I did it it just happened naturally, which is funny, which I would have loved to have planned it, but I'm going to be completely honest, it just naturally happened the way I built it, is that I actually created spaces right between the eyes and nose sockets that fit really well together. So I'm just going to fill them in just like they are. because they are actually in a pretty great space. Look at that. And we'll put some there. Awesome. And we're obviously, because we want to keep it as much of a square as possible, we're just going to put a couple seams going right up the middle. I'm actually going to move back a little bit because I didn't like how that looked. I'm going to relax this a little bit. There we go. So I relaxed it a little bit so that way I could keep a straight line. Because like I said before about symmetry, I love keeping a straight line. So that way I know where the middle of the head is. Now we've got a big open space here. And this is why I love to do this last, because you feel like you get a lot of sense of things done when you do this. So I'm going to put my one dot back here in the middle. And then we're just going to do chunks. Look at that. Isn't that cool? And then obviously we have, because we got a slight bridge to the skull, you see it right here. We're just going to put them on each side. Base of the skull here. So we still have a little bit of a ridge here. So I'm actually going to put another one here. And what I mean by a ridge is it's hard to see, but you can see it right here. See how it kind of tips down into the skull itself. It comes down into the nose. We're going to fill that one in. Perfect. And then we're going to kind of do this at the top. There we go. Now, remember, retopping doesn't have to be super pretty. You just want to make sure you get the base form of the object. That way, when you go to bake on the retop, it fills in the gaps and you have a lot less polys, but you're still getting that really cool shape you're looking for. So, I'm going to do the bridge here of the skull. About onto here. Perfect. Now from here, you kind of play with this. I'm going to kind of go a little bit wider here because there's not so much of a dip anymore. Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really excited. This is looking really good. I'm really happy with how this retop's going so far, because we got the face cleaned up really well. We got the eyes nice and wrapped up pretty tightly. Now, I am going to, usually what I do is I do all the really hard retopping first, which is like the mouth down here as well. But I wanted to give you guys a sense of how I build out. So I'm going to do about till I get to this job, to where the upper part of the mandible starts to twist here. And I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to do the teeth and do the rest. But I wanted to show you this part first, and then I'm going to keep going until I finish getting the whole skull. And when we cut back, we'll cut back to this being completely retopped, and we're moving on to working on the mouth. And I'll show you how I quickly wrap retop teeth. Not wrap it, retop teeth. All right? And then we'll probably attack the back here, which is going to be another little... This is probably going to be a little bit more difficult spot. I'm not so much worried about the details in here, but I do want to keep these holes in a really nice shape that are here and here and throughout here. So we're going to definitely touch on that towards after I get most of the skull wrapped. All right. All right, guys, as you can see, I've retopped the head, pretty much all of it. Other than the teeth, which I wanted to do separately because I wanted to show you a cool trick for wrapping cylindrical shapes that makes life so much easier. So we're going to go ahead and get started in that. I had a lot of fun retopping this. This is like really fun because you get to really learn about the shape of the model you're working on. And you don't really get to do that when you build it from scratch. You only really get to do it when you're taking an already existing high poly and breaking it down to its basic shape so that you can make it usable in assets and games and videos and things like that. So to get started, we're going to go down to the teeth. All right, with our quad draw, like we did to start, we are going to create first a ring around the tooth. So we're going to work pretty quickly on this because I'm sure you guys already know what it's done by the 4th demo that you've probably seen of this, or Cooper and I talking for a good hour on this. But I will tell you this, you do really need to pay attention to getting good at this because it's really important to be able to do this skill because a lot of companies look for it when you're trying to get out into the work world. All right, so we have our loop and it's around our tooth. This is a really cool trick. I love using this. I use it more often than I do just like the dot dot and the shift system. What I do is I create my loops. If you hold tab and click on the edge, you can actually extrude the edge, which I'm sure we talked about it, but just a refresher. But the cool thing is if you hold the tab and you hit the middle mouse button while you're holding on the edge you want to do, you actually pull a whole loop. If you could, and that whole loop will follow the shape of the object you're working on. Sometimes it'll break a little bit inside. If it does, you can just pull it out by the vertices, which isn't difficult. You know, as long as you know where you want to go with the shape. We're going to do it again. So you hold tab, hold the middle mouse button, and drag. Now we're getting to the point where we do need a few more loops in there because, or a few more vertices because obviously the object is getting a little lost because we're going pretty hard on the edges. So to do that, you are going to shift, click on the multi-cut, and we're just going to create some lines. Super easy. We don't need that one. Once you create the line you want, just hit enter, click the line you want, hit enter, and we're just going to do a couple of these just to make it so it retopos a little bit smoother. And one more here. Check the backside. We'll do one here just because I can, because we're still really way low on the poly count. Head back to quick draw, and we just go right back to what we were doing. So tab, hit the middle button, drag it up. And now we've got our new edges. And we'll pull these out because, you know, we like to make it as clean and as flush as possible. It might be my OCD kicking in. I just like everything perfect. Tab, middle button, and drag. Now as we get towards the bottom, it's going to try to connect itself to all those vertice points. And this is where it gets a little tricky because you don't want them to control the flow of how you're modeling. If you keep dragging, eventually it'll just, I guess I could just show you. Or it already did it right here. See how it breaks? It's because it's looking for vertices to connect to itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control Z and pull it out. And from here, we're actually going to take it one edge at a time. So tab, drag, tab, drag. We just want to let them snap into place with each other. We don't want them to snap where we don't want them. If you have to zoom in, zoom in. Nothing's going to tell you not to. And just keep pulling on them a little bit. Just take our time. This is a very tedious task to do, but the more you practice it, the easier it gets, and it gets a lot more fun too when you find shapes that you're really enjoying. So, boom. And it looks like it reconnected down there, so that's okay. Now, we just hold the shift button, and we just fill it in the way we want it to go. I kind of want to go this way. It doesn't want to do that for me, huh? So I'm going to pull this out a little bit. There we go. It's not going to be perfect, but it is going to get you where you need to be for the model. Now, I didn't talk about this because I didn't hit it when I was working on the rest of the skull. But when you do get a triangle, you notice it turns purple. If you click on the triangle, it's not the end of the world if you leave it in there. I personally don't work with triangles. I don't like them. So this is where we go back into the multi-cut. Shift multi-cut. We are going to cut not the triangle, but one of the surfaces touching it. I usually take the one I can see easily is the quad, which is right here. These are a little bit bent, uneven quads. And we're just going to cut on those and then hit enter, because now we've retained the quad for that shape, but now this is also a quad shape. And we can just pull it a little bit if we want to make it more obvious. But now you can see it is a quad shape, and that is what we want to work with. It's the most ideal shape to work with. All right, that's how you easily wrap a tooth or a cylindrical piece. I used that same technique to wrap this joint that's going around, and it makes it so much easier than trying to do piece by piece and trying to snap those edges, because sometimes those edges will just want to connect. And then from there, all you got to do is I'm going to finish wrapping it, and then I'm going to bake it, and then I'm actually going to take it in and texture it, because I'm thinking about making mine a little bit more robotics meets organic, just because I can and it sounds like fun. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Take it to bake and you're all set. All right guys, I hope you enjoyed the video.